One Piece chapter 1086 is out, and there's actually so much to talk about within it. There's a new character that's just been immediately revealed, like it hasn't been built up, there's been no silhouette, the names of the Gorosei, and so much more. For every question we get answered, a new one is just popping up in its place. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I will be spoiling this chapter in its entirety. If you haven't read it yet, go do it now. I'll wait here. So unfortunately, we've got Void Month coming up with no One Piece for about 5 weeks. Fortunately though, Oda is looking after his health, he's fixing his eyes, and that means we've got 5 weeks here when we can sit and chat and come up with more wild theories about this new chapter. Let's start with the big reveal on the last page. That is, of course, Saint Figurland Garling. So where do I start with this guy? Well, first off, his character design is awesome. I've always loved the more kind of cartoony character designs in One Piece. Characters that have a silliness to them, like Watatsumi the giant fishman, Baron Tamago, and even Fukuro from CP9 or 0 with his zipper mouth. People that have outrageous designs, but the people around them just accept it as normal. Well, Saint Figurland Garling is no exception, with his fantastic moon-shaped hair and beard, and the pointy, outy mullet that just sticks straight out, looks equal parts ridiculous and amazing. I would dare anyone to make fun of him with his hairstyle, as we immediately find out that he's actually the captain, the supreme commander of God's Knights. He is the judge that sentenced our dear beloved Saint Don Quixote Mosgard to death. And think about that for a second. That means that this guy has the authority to pass judgment on the celestial dragons, the unjudgeables. He sits with that famous shonen old guy energy shared by the likes of Garp and Master Roshi. He's got one hand on his sword and just a cool pose in general. I also notice as I write that you can only see one definitive arm in this panel. And if this guy only has one arm, then I am gonna scream. If you haven't figured out why that would be so crazy, well, I'm about to tell you. So who else do we know who famously has one arm? Of course, it is Shanks. And with the limited information we have on this judgmental judge, we actually have a connection to Shanks already in his name. We first heard mention of the Figurland family in One Piece film Red, where the Gorosei mentioned that Uta, Shanks' non-canon adopted daughter, could be a member of the Figurland family due to her relation to Shanks. So from this info, we can obviously assume that Shanks himself is a member of the Figurland family. From there, I remember the internet and Reddit specifically going back and forth about whether it was vital information or relevant at all, especially because the film isn't canon, therefore the family isn't canon. However, with this reveal in this chapter, it's now confirmed canon that the Figurland family is real, and this little comment in film Red was actually a really cool hint. Is Figurland Garland related to Shanks? Is he his father? His uncle? From this one panel, we actually have a surprising amount of information on Saint Figurland Garling. We know that the world government has an elite unit called God's Knights. These guys hold more power than the Marines, and this guy is the supreme commander of them. They were summoned to investigate the failed assassination of Saint Charlos and the role of Saint Mjosgard in it. And while we didn't really know anything about them at the time, we found out that they're quite powerful and they have a lot of power and influence. Saint Garling is also the old king of God Valley. Now that is actually another connection to Shanks, as we all know that he was found in a treasure chest after the God Valley incident. It all makes sense as well, because we know that there were world nobles, celestial dragons present on the island. So the well-known theory of Shanks maybe being a celestial dragon, it's getting more and more evidence to prove that it's actually true. Now, we all love Shanks. We all look up to Shanks in the same way that Luffy does. But do not let this old geezer's name make you think that he's a good guy. Because the first thing we hear him say is in relation to Mjosgard choosing to protect fishmen. And he says, Basically, anyone who protects scum is lower than the scum that they protect. What a classically evil and vile thing to say. He clearly embodies all of the worst parts of the Celestial Dragons. If this is the first member of the Figurlin family that we're introduced to, I think it may have been good that Shanks was separated from them, because this guy's a jerk. I'm not sure where he's sitting in this panel, because you can see Celestial Dragons behind him cheering and etc. But he has ultimately come to the conclusion that St. Mjosgard is guilty of attempting to assassinate St. Charles, which is kind of fair enough, and of defending Fishman. It is St. Figurlin Garling that has passed down the judgment, and going off the way that his hand is on his sword, I wouldn't be surprised if he's the one that's actually going to execute him as well.
The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword.
So this is, at this moment, everything we know about St. Figurlin Garling. I told you it was a fair bit. He seems to be an awfully powerful character, has enormous influence, so much in fact that he can actually execute a world noble. He also seems to be quite vile, and we assume that he'll be one of the bigger villains in the final saga. If you'll indulge me and let me power scale for a moment, which I'm so bad at, I don't pretend to be good at it. He's the head of God's Knights, which is supposed to be more powerful than the top Marines. And there's a good chance that he comes from the same family as Shanks, who is also top tier powerful. Therefore, there is a very big chance that this guy is going to be super powerful. Maybe even an endgame level threat for someone like Zorro. So yeah, that's one panel and we get so much information about him. So let's move on. The Gorosei, we now know their names and also what each of their individual roles are within the world government. We have Saint Shepherd Jupiter, the warrior god of agriculture, Saint Ethan Baron V. Nusjuro, the warrior god of finance, it's clearly a Wano name, Saint Hopman Valerie, the warrior god of justice, Saint Marcus Mars, the warrior god of the environment, and of course Saint J. Garcia Satin, who turns out to be the warrior god of defense science, which actually explains why he's the one that got sent to Egghead Island to try and deal with Vegapunk. Now, has anyone else noticed all the scars that the Gorosei have? Whether it's on their faces or necks, it seems like these guys have definitely been through some shit. And judging from the last chapter, where we kinda saw them transform and deal a hell of a lot of damage to Sabo, we know that these guys are definitely combatants. Will any of their roles come into play in the story? I'm not sure. However, Oda does have a history of writing villains that have a reason for doing whatever naughty thing they're doing. The bad guys always have motivation, always have some event or person or plotline that explains why they are the way they are and why they are doing what they're doing. Think of Dofi, think of Crocodile, like Magellan, all these different reasons for the antagonists in the story. And those three just off the top of my head. So these guys, the Gorosei, they're in charge of agriculture, defense science, the environment, justice, and finance. Which, other than finance, they all seem like quite noble things to be in charge of and, therefore passionate about. You could imagine them taking agriculture and the environment so seriously that they find reasons to enforce that at the expense of citizens. So, and one more time, if you can indulge me on a quick tangent. Has anyone here played Fable 2? So you go through the entire game trying to thwart your older brother, who's the king of the kingdom. He's evil, he imposes heavy taxes, he doesn't listen to the citizens. He's just your generic bad guy villain. In the end of the game, you defeat him and you become the king. And you realize there's actually this massive existential threat of darkness that is coming to invade the kingdom, and your brother was actually stockpiling all this money and resources to outfit the army and the defenses of the kingdom to defend against this massive threat. Now, your good guy character, who's made all these promises to random singular peasants, has to either keep those promises or save/generate money for the defense of the kingdom. It's a fantastic curveball to throw at the player to try and make them think of the greater good. And you never know, these Gorosei may have similar motivations. Maybe everything they do is for the greater good. Maybe they have similar reasons to impose this heavy lifestyle that we see far too many citizens in One Piece living within and suffering within. None of their character designs look classically evil. They just look like old men. Old wise men. Maybe Nasjuro, the one who looks like Samurai Gandhi, but he just looks kind of more intense than villainous. We know he's a samurai and they take themselves seriously and they're warriors, so it makes sense. I'm actually stoked to hear these guys, if they could justify themselves in the inevitable confrontation that will occur. So back to the start of the chapter, and we see Pell, Chaka, and Igaram. They're running around with photos of Vivi, crying, trying to find her, and also they have no idea that Cobra's been murdered. As far as they know, he's just disappeared. Poor Igaram, he is so desperate, he's got tears streaming down his face, and you can see the world nobles here, they just don't give a damn. They look so sinister. It's like they're just nothing but irritated by this large gentleman ruining their peace. One actually looks like Shiryu. We continue on to find some stowaways on the Aegis Kingdom ship. That is, of course, Vivi and her savior, the gallant Wapol. Just quickly here as well, guys, the thought bubbles here, they're just whispers. They're used in Hunter x Hunter, they're used in heaps of other manga. They're not talking telepathically, don't think about it too much. They're contextual, and in this panel, they're just whispering to each other. You can see they're interacting with each other, they are talking to each other, it's just whispers. So our stowaways are in contact with Big News Morgans and he's coming to scoop them up. Get it? Scoop them up? Vivi asks Wapol what he saw in that room and he is not going to tell her. I'd like to think this is him trying to kind of protect Vivi. Obviously they're in a very stressful situation right now and hearing about her father like that may push her over the edge. However, he is just in full self-preservation mode. He's scared of CP0 chasing him, he's scared of the world government, and he knows the less he says, the better. He got some information that he didn't want accidentally, and he's going to keep his ridiculously big mouth shut for once. This fits his character too. In Drum Island, you can really imagine him gloating and telling Vivi straight away just to see her reaction. However, he clearly wants to protect himself, more so than he wants to make fun and joke around about another person's misfortune. Another stowaway we get a quick look at is Sabo, and he is heavily injured in the bilge of the Lucia Kingdom ship. Not only is he in pain, but he's also carrying the weight of the final words of King Cobra, telling him to live on and to pass on his final message to Vivi and potentially Luffy. We're then treated to the moment before the Gorosei and Imu called the attack on the Lucia. Imu says that the time has come to put Vegapunk's invention to the test. The unofficial translation calls it the Mother Flame, and Imu has decided that the time has come to test it on the kingdom of Lelouch. For what it's worth, we see the slightest bit of resistance from the Gorosei, as Valkyrie mentions that quite a lot of people actually live there. However, Marcus Mars immediately shuts this down and says that the world moves at the will of the creator. Wait a minute. This sounds like he's talking about Imu's will. So is Imu the creator? This just creates a whole new question about Imu and their origins. What exactly did they create? The current world situation? The world government? The status quo? We also know that they chose Lelouch because they intercepted Sabo's emergency communications that he sent through Lelouch. But Imu also states here that they chose Lelouch because of its close proximity. So we hear Sabo talk about a massive dark cloud that was floating above Lelouch before the weapon went off. And we also know that Vegapunk has spoke about energy issues in the past for his inventions and all around Egghead Island. Would it be so hard to believe that at this point, his new weapon can't move too far away from Mary Joie before it needs to return somewhere to get refueled or recharged or something? We hear of the Kingdom of Tajin and the Aegis Kingdom. They've both started rebelling and the Navy already has their hands full dealing with the previous nations doing the exact same thing. They can't rely on help from the warlords as they've just disbanded them. So what are they going to do? Well, deploy the new warlords, the Seraphim. We get to see this Seraphim version of Dofi, Crocodile and Gecko Moria, and they look awesome from what we can see. They've even got little PX tattoos. Crocodile is androgynous, so Crocomum theory is still viable. If I can figure out how, I'll link to my little YouTube short about my Seraphim Crocomum theory. It goes for 30 seconds, so please check it out. While this is all happening, we go back to the Revolutionary Army and get some theory crafting from Ivankov of all people. They start excitedly riffing about the potential that Emu has used the immortality surgery, and it's the same Emu that ruled one of the original 20 kingdoms that formed the world government. Now, Emu must be pissed, because now that someone knows their name, the more that spreads, the more that information spreads, the more likely it is that the name gets to someone like Ivankov that has some prior knowledge to it. Ivankov is clearly smart enough to put 2 and 2 together to realize that only someone with as much influence or social standing as a founder of the world government, one of the original 20, could give orders to the Gorosei, those 5 elder stars who stand above all others. So this is a kind of soft confirmation of Imu's identity. It really feels like we're just around the corner from getting a face reveal of Imu. Every chapter, not only are we getting drip-fed more and more information about him, but the characters in the story are getting closer and closer to unveiling it themselves. So with this Void Month coming up, I would not be surprised if we come back with a massive chapter. Some proper answers as to the Void Century hijinks, Emu's past and rise, and the final aftermath of the Reverie before we move on. You know though, the alternative is getting back to Egghead and seeing the inevitable Egghead incident build up and crescendo into something amazing. So that's it for this chapter. There has been so much to go on. Oda has given us heaps to unpack and think about. Let's all send him good vibes for his surgery and recovery and hope that everything goes well. So now, if you've watched this far, then please consider leaving a like. It takes 1 second, and maybe even subscribing or sending this review to a friend of yours who's also into One Piece. That would really help me out. Have an awesome weekend, have an awesome week, have an even more awesome Void Month, and I will talk to you soon.